The auctioneer barely paused when he got to lot 31. 12 colonies, he said, the way a man might say 12 broken chairs. Heritage breed. Brood boxes are shot, queens are old. Buyer takes as is. No warranty on survival. He looked out at the crowd, ranchers, supply men, a few curiosity seekers from town, and nobody moved. Colette Briard stood near the back of the yard with $43 in her coat pocket, and a knowledge of bees that most people in Harlan County, Wyoming, would not have believed she possessed. She had learned from her grandmother in the hill country of southwestern Pennsylvania, a woman who kept 30 hives and spoke about bees the way other women spoke about children, with attention, with patience, with a willingness to be stung. Colette was 26. She had arrived in Harlan County 4 months earlier with a trunk, a crate of tools, and a debt she was not going to discuss with anyone. The small parcel of land she rented on the eastern edge of town had a cabin, a hand pump that worked, and nothing else worth mentioning. She had taken work at the feed store 3 days a week, enough to eat and to pay the rent, and she had spent the remaining days walking the property and thinking. The auctioneer said, "Do I hear $5 for the lot?" Colette raised her hand. The man beside her, stocky, gray-bearded, a rancher she had seen in the feed store, turned and looked at her with an expression she recognized. Not hostility, something closer to pity. "All 12, he said. "All 12, she said. Nobody else bid. She paid her $5 and arranged with the auction house to collect the colonies the following morning. As she was signing the paperwork, she overheard the gray-bearded rancher say to someone behind her, "Those hives are half dead." She just paid $5 for firewood. The colonies were worse than she had expected, and better than she had feared. She spent the first 3 days doing nothing but looking. She pulled frames slowly, read the brood patterns, tracked where the bees clustered at night. 2 of the 12 queens were failing. She could see it in the spotty, scattered brood, the low energy of the workers. 3 more hives had mite loads she could count without a wash. The boxes themselves were warped and sun-bleached, the wood so dried out that light showed through the joints. But the bees themselves, the actual bees, were a strain she had not seen in years. Compact, dark, with an unusual calmness on the frame. Her grandmother had called this type steady bees. They did not panic. They did not boil out of the box when disturbed. They simply continued working, and they worked longer into the cold than most other breeds she knew. She requeened the 2 failing hives. With queens she raised herself from the strongest colony, a process that took 3 weeks and required more patience than she currently felt she had. She treated the mite loads with oxalic acid she ordered from a supplier in Denver. She repaired the worst of the boxes with lumber she bought on credit from the mill on the south end of town. A man named Pettigrew, who looked at her measurements twice before cutting, not because he doubted them, but because he wasn't used to a woman who came in with exact measurements already written down. By the end of the first month, she had lost 1 colony. The other 11 held. She did not tell anyone what she was doing. There was no one to tell. The land around her parcel was clover and thistle in the low ground, wild bergamot on the slope above the creek, and a stand of linden trees at the far edge of the property that she had noticed immediately when she first walked the land. Linden honey was rare. Most beekeepers never got it in quantity, because linden blooms for only 2 or 3 weeks in early summer, and you had to have the colonies strong enough and positioned close enough to work the flow before it ended. She began moving hives in late April, a process that required getting up before dawn, waiting until the temperature dropped enough that the bees were clustered inside, then loading the boxes onto a borrowed flatbed cart and walking it slowly across the uneven ground in the dark. She did this 4 times over 2 weeks, repositioning colonies by 50 feet at a time. Bees needed gradual relocation, or they would return to the original location and find nothing there. By the time linden bloomed in early June, she had 7 colonies positioned within 200 yards of the trees. She did not sleep much that June. She was up before sunrise and out in the field with the bees by the time the dew had dried. She watched the foragers come back heavy, their pollen baskets loaded, and she stood very still at the hive entrance some mornings and just listened to the pitch of the hum change as the flow intensified. A working colony in a strong flow sounds different from a colony at rest. The sound is higher, more continuous, something between a murmur and a roar. When she pulled the first frames of capped linden honey in late June, she sat down on an upturned bucket and looked at them for a long time. The wax was white. The honey beneath it was pale gold, almost translucent. She uncapped a cell with her thumb and tasted it, and it was exactly what she remembered from her grandmother's kitchen, light and floral, with a sharpness underneath that faded into something clean. She extracted 41 pounds from that first pull. She had no customers. The general store in Harlan County was run by a man named Aldous Fitch, who stocked two types of honey, a dark wildflower blend in a tin can that came by rail from a distributor in Cheyenne, and occasionally a local clover honey that a beekeeper north of town sold him in unlabeled jars. Aldous was a practical man who did not change his stock without reason. Colette walked into the store on a Tuesday morning in July with 2 jars in a cloth bag. She set them on the counter. "I'd like you to taste this," she said. Aldous looked at the jars, then at her. He had seen her in the store before. She bought flour and salt and occasionally dried beans, but he did not know her name or her business. "What is it?" he said. "Linden honey," she said. "Single source, this county. I pulled it 3 weeks ago." He opened one jar, dipped a spoon, and tasted it the way a man tastes something he has already decided he won't like. Then he tasted it again. "Where'd you get linden trees?" he said. "East parcel on the Dunmore Road," she said. "Old stand, near the creek bend." He tasted it a third time, which she took as a good sign. "I stock local when I can," he said, which was not exactly true, but was the kind of thing he liked to say. "What are you asking per jar?" She had thought about this. The Cheyenne tin sold for 30 cents. The clover honey sold for 25. She said 40 cents. Aldous looked at her. "It's different honey," she said. "There's no other linden honey in this county, possibly in this territory." He bought 4 jars that day at 35 cents, which was not what she had asked, but was better than she had expected for a first sale. When she got home, she wrote the number in a small notebook she kept on the shelf above the dry sink. July 14, 4 jars, 140 cents. It was not enough to change anything, but it was a start, and she had learned something. Aldous had tasted it 3 times. That was the thing she held on to. The woman who became her first real ally was not someone she had sought out. Rowena Dix ran the laundry on the west side of town and knew everything that happened in Harlan County within 48 hours of its happening. She was 40, compact, with the kind of permanent sunburn that comes from years of standing over outdoor wash kettles. She had noticed Colette at the auction, had noticed her again at the feed store, and one morning in August, she walked out to the east parcel on the Dunmore Road and knocked on the cabin door. Colette opened it. "I heard you're keeping bees," Rowena said. "I am," Colette said. "I'd like to see them." Colette considered her. "Have you been around bees before?" "No, then you'll need to move slowly and not wave your hands." "I don't wave my hands," Rowena said. This turned out to be true. She stood beside the hives without flinching, watching the foragers arrive and leave, and she asked careful questions. Not the questions most people asked. Do they sting? Are they dangerous? But different ones. How do they know which flowers to go to? How far do they travel? What happens to a colony in winter? Colette answered each one. By the time they walked back to the cabin, she felt, for the first time in months, that she was talking to someone who was actually listening. Rowena bought 6 jars of linden honey that afternoon. She paid full price without negotiating, and within 2 weeks, 3 of her laundry customers had come to the east parcel looking for honey. Colette had not anticipated word of mouth. She had been thinking about production, how to overwinter the colonies, how to expand in spring, whether the linden stand could support more hives than she currently had. She had not thought about what happened when someone liked the product enough to tell other people. She raised her price to 40 cents a jar. Nobody balked. The trouble that came in October was not from outside. It came from the land itself. The east parcel had a drainage problem she had not fully understood in spring, when the ground was dry. In a wet fall, the low ground where she had positioned 4 of her strongest colonies turned into standing water after 2 days of heavy rain. She moved the hives to higher ground in the dark and the rain, alone, with a lantern hung from a fence post, and she got stung 11 times through her gloves and lost 1 colony that had already been weakened by the move. She sat in the wet grass afterward and did not cry, because she was too tired and too angry for crying. She thought about the colony she had lost, the frames she had built, the queen she had raised, the honey they had put up through the summer, and she thought about the $43 she had come to Harlan County with, and the debt that had brought her here in the first place, and she felt, for a sustained moment, the particular weight of building something in isolation. Then she got up and went inside and wrote the loss in her notebook. October 9. Colony 4 lost. Move remaining hives to high ground. Reevaluate drainage before spring. She was not going to stop. That was the only decision she had made before arriving in Wyoming, and the only one she had not revisited since. She was not going to stop. She spent that winter preparing. She had 10 colonies going into November, strong and well-provisioned. She had built up reserves, both honey stores for the bees, and extracted honey she was storing in the cool back room of the cabin in sealed crocks. She had, through Rowena's network and through Aldis's store, developed a small but consistent list of buyers. 7 households in town, a boarding house on the main road, and a restaurant called the Elkhead that had started using her honey in 2 of its dishes. The Elkhead was the important one. The cook there was a man named Garrett who had worked in Denver before coming to Harlan County, and who took ingredients seriously in a way that most people in the territory did not. He had started buying 1 jar a week, then 2. In November, he pulled her aside after a delivery and said, "I want to put this on the menu, by name." "By what name?" she said. "Your name," he said, "or the land's name. Something local." She thought about it for a day. The stand of linden trees had been there long before she arrived. The previous owner of the parcel had called the low ground near the trees Dunmore Bottom, after the road. She told Garrett he could call it Dunmore Linden Honey, and he had a small card printed for the tables that described it. Local, single, source, harvested in Harlan County. She had not asked him to do the card. She did not find out about it until a woman stopped her on the street in December and said she had read about the honey at the Elkhead and wanted to buy some directly. Colette sold her 4 jars on the spot, standing on the frozen mud of the main street, and walked home feeling something she did not immediately have a name for. It took her a day to recognize it as confidence, not the brittle, defensive kind she had been carrying since she arrived, the kind that came from having nothing to lose, but something quieter and more solid. The kind that comes from making something real. By the following spring, she had more orders than she could fill. This was a problem she had not fully prepared for, and she sat with it for a week before deciding what to do. She could not produce more honey than her 10 colonies allowed. She could expand the apiary, but expansion took time. A new colony needed a full season before it produced surplus. She could raise her prices further, which would reduce demand but increase margin, or she could do both. She raised her prices and began expanding simultaneously. She acquired 4 more nucleus colonies in April from a beekeeper 40 miles east who was retiring and selling off his equipment. She paid $60 for the nucs and the boxes together, which represented most of what she had saved over the winter, and she walked the colonies home on a borrowed wagon in the early morning, the same way she had moved her hives the previous fall, slowly, carefully, in the dark. Rowena helped her set them up on the high ground she had prepared. They worked without talking much, which Colette appreciated. Rowena had a talent for understanding what a task required, and doing exactly that, without needing to fill the silence with commentary. When they were done, they sat on the fence rail and looked at the apiary. 14 colonies now, arranged in 2 staggered rows on the slope above the creek. "You're going to need help this summer," Rowena said. "I know," Colette said. "There's a girl who works for me some mornings," Rowena said. 16, good with her hands, not afraid of much. "Her name is Kit. I can send her out on days she's not needed at the laundry." "Does she know anything about bees?" Colette said. "No," Rowena said, "but she listens." Kit Sauer arrived the following Monday, small and wiry, with red hair and the deliberate movements of someone who had learned to be careful around fragile things. Colette spent the first morning teaching her how to approach a hive, how to use smoke, how to read a frame. Kit made no unnecessary movements and asked no unnecessary questions, and when Colette showed her the queen, marking her with a small yellow dot of paint, Kit leaned in close and looked for a long time without speaking. "She's bigger than the others," Kit said finally. "Yes," Colette said. "How do you find her in all of that?" "You look for the space," Colette said. "The other bees move away from her. You find the space. You find the queen." Kit thought about this. "That works for a lot of things," she said. Colette did not answer, but she filed it away. The linden flow that second summer was heavier than the first. Whether it was the weather or the colonies coming into full strength, or simply that she had learned better how to position them and work the flow, Colette extracted 112 pounds of linden honey in a 3-week period in June. She extracted it in the evenings after the day's work was done, running the hand extractor in the back room of the cabin, and Kit helped her carry frames and manage the uncapping, and they worked late into several nights with the lantern hanging from the rafter beam and the smell of warm wax filling the room. It was during one of those late nights that Kit said, without looking up from the frame she was uncapping, "My father says you won't last another winter." Colette looked at her. "He says the county doesn't need a honey operation, and you're going to run out of buyers." "What do you say?" Colette said. Kit considered this with the same deliberateness she brought to everything. "I say he hasn't tasted the honey." Colette laughed, a short, genuine sound that surprised her slightly, because she had not laughed in some time. She sent Kit home with 2 jars that night, and did not say anything further about it. The first large order came in July, from a source she had not expected. A man named Horace Tully passed through Harlan County on his way between Cheyenne and a ranch he was developing further north. He stayed 2 nights at the Elkhead Hotel, ate both dinners there, and on his second morning asked Garrett where the honey came from. Garrett gave him Colette's name and the road to the east parcel. Tully arrived mid-morning on a Thursday, driving a good buggy with a matched pair of grays. He was 60, heavy-set, with the deliberate manner of a man who had spent decades making decisions and had learned not to rush them. Colette met him at the gate. "You're the beekeeper," he said. "I am," she said. "I'd like to see the operation," he said. She showed him. He walked the apiary row without flinching, watched a frame inspection without speaking, and tasted honey from the extractor room. She offered him a spoon directly from the settling tank, and he stood for a moment with his eyes slightly unfocused, the way people sometimes did when they were tasting something that required attention. "I'm building a hotel in Casper," he said. "Opens next spring. I want local products in the dining room. Things that come from somewhere specific, that you can put a name to." "The honey has a name," Colette said. "Dunmore Linden." "I know," he said. "I read the card at the Elkhead. That's why I came." He wanted 60 pounds to start, delivered by January, with the possibility of a standing quarterly order if the hotel did well. He named a price. It was higher than she had asked anyone. She did not show what she felt. She said she could meet the delivery, and she would send him a written confirmation within the week. After his buggy had disappeared down the Dunmore Road, she stood at the gate for several minutes, looking at nothing in particular. Then she went inside and wrote it in the notebook. July 17, Tully order. 60 pounds. Delivery January. Confirm in writing. Below that, she wrote the price he had named, and below that she sat for a moment with the pencil in her hand. It was the largest single payment she had ever been promised for anything. She met the January delivery. It required everything she had stored and careful management of her winter reserves. And she made the trip to Casper in a rented wagon, with the sealed crocks packed in straw, alone, in weather that dropped below 0 the second night, and forced her to spend it at a way station with the wagon pulled inside and the horse blanketed. She arrived in Casper 2 days later, delivered the honey, and stood in the kitchen of the new hotel while the head cook opened one of the crocks and tasted it. The cook, a large, quiet man who turned out to be from New Orleans and had opinions about ingredients, tasted it once, then looked at Colette, then tasted it again. "You kept this how?" he said. "Sealed crocks in a cool room," she said. "Honey doesn't spoil. You just have to keep moisture out." He nodded slowly. "We'll take the standing order," he said. "Quarterly." She did not allow herself to react until she was back in the wagon, moving out of Casper on the return road with the empty crocks rattling in the straw. Then she pulled the horse to a walk and let out a long, slow breath into the cold air and watched it dissipate. The second spring, she bought the east parcel outright. The owner, a man named Pettigrew's cousin, who lived in Ohio and had inherited it and never seen it, had been wanting to sell for 2 years. Colette's land agent negotiated the price down from what was asked, and she paid a portion in cash and carried a note for the remainder. She signed the papers in the land agent's office on a Thursday afternoon and walked home on a road she now owned a piece of. She expanded the apiary to 22 colonies that summer. She hired Kit through the full season, not just mornings, and she brought on a second hand, a young man named Calvin, who had grown up on a farm and understood animals, and who learned the bees with the same steady attention Kit had shown. The linden flow that third summer produced 181 pounds. She had more orders than she filled. She had begun, the previous winter, keeping a waiting list. something she had never imagined she would need to do, sitting in that cabin in her first October, moving hives in the rain. Rowena came out to the apiary one afternoon in late July, the summer of the third year, and stood with Colette at the edge of the linden stand while Calvin and Kit worked the hives below them. "Your father's friend," Rowena said. "The man who sold the north pasture. He was asking about you at my shop last week." Colette did not look up from the hive she was watching. "What did he want to know?" "Whether you were still here," Rowena said. "Whether you'd managed. What did you tell him?" Rowena was quiet for a moment. "I told him you had a waiting list," she said. "I told him the hotel in Casper was asking for a second quarterly allocation. I told him the Elkhead had started storing a reserve because they were afraid of running short." Colette pulled a frame and held it up to the light. The comb was full and capped, white as new linen, heavy. "I also told him," Rowena said, "that you had set the price for linden honey in this county, that anyone else who tried to sell honey here would be measuring themselves against yours." Colette did not answer for a moment. She was looking at the frame, at the thousands of precise cells, the labor they represented, the order that had come out of nothing but time and attention, and the particular stubbornness of small creatures that did not give up when the season turned cold. "He didn't believe it when I came here," she said. "It was not quite a question." "No," Rowena said. "He didn't. Does he now?" Rowena smiled slightly. "He asked if you were taking on investors." Colette set the frame back in the box and closed the hive. She picked up her smoker and walked back toward the cabin, and she did not hurry, because she had learned that the work was not in the hurrying. It was in the showing up, morning after morning, season after season, until the thing you had built was too solid to question. She was not interested in investors. She already owned the land.